Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by
DHG is a full-service accounting firm serving Memphis and the Mid-South region for more than 60 years, combining community involvement with the technical resources of a national firm. For more information, visit dhgllp.com.
the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
A continued look at the history of the city's financial problems tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. Today is the second of a two-part show that follows the Financial Mess series that was in the Commercial Appeal. I'm glad to have Mark Pereskia at the table. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Projects reporter for the Commercial Appeal and the lead reporter on the whole series. Thanks very much. We've also got Tom Jones, sometime consultant to Memphis and consultant to cities all around the world and the country. Thank you for being here. Rick Masson is a former Chief Administrative Officer for the city during the Harrington administration. Thank you for being here. And Marlon Mosby, a former finance director for the city. Thanks for being here. Also a consultant to other administrations, I believe, so we'll get to that. And Bill Dree, senior reporter with the Memphis Daily News. And so the series, and it's still on the Commercial Appeal website, and the previous show we did is on the KNO side, and it's on the Memphis Daily News side if people want to track along. But it covers some broad areas of how it happened, how the city got into the financial mess, annexation and population loss, and then the rise of debt and spending that to some degree track that. We went through that in last week's show. And we'll focus this show on pension, the drop part of the pension, the rise of spending with the police department, and a look at some of the pain ahead and the pain that's going on right now in budget season. But again, I'll ask you, Mark, to kind of frame why the series was important and what your thoughts, takeaways from the series are.
Well, I think one of the driving forces for the current financial crisis that the city went through was the whole pension issue. Is why we spent some time talking about that. You know, the state legislature had mandated that cities have to meet their annual required contribution. They had this unfunded liability sitting there. They had paid all the money that they owe to the pension, but now you've got to meet it by 2020, and so this is what the city's up against. And so we really focused on how they got there with the pension system that they are now, and some of the very generous benefits that they gave over the years, and how they stopped funding it. Really, I mean, before the economy crashed in 2008, a couple of years before that, they were already severely shortchanging the pension system. So we tried to drill down on some of those issues.
And all of that against the backdrop of, as we talked about on the last show, and Bill, you had the advantage of watching the show, and as we joked, you can fact check us on how we did. Henry Evans, the former CIO, was here. But all that spending and the rise in pensions, and there was a rise in staffing, all that was against the backdrop of annexation, of population loss, and again, that spending increase. Your thoughts when you watched the show? I mean, what you reported on much of that, but what did we miss, and what did it remind you of?
Oh, I'm not going to say that anyone at this table for that show missed anything or now. It was a pretty lively discussion. Context to me is really king on this, and I think that you all talked about the priorities at the time. The city was a changing creature during those years. We're talking about a span from 1960 all the way up to the present. There are issues present today in running a city that folks in 1960 never even dreamed of. There are things that cities do today that they didn't do in 1960, and vice versa. And also, if you look at our city in particular, the city of Memphis, look at all the history that we've been through. Look at all the turmoil that have all played a part in determining what our priorities are. Yeah. Mayors get elected based on several things that they want to do, usually 3 or 4 big things, I think, even though some folks campaign on a much larger scale of things that they want to do. And people make choices on that, and they make changes based on that as well.
Yeah. Well, so against that backdrop of the history of 40 years, there's a pension program. There's a pension that is underfunded, as Mark said better than I will. it's a national phenomenon to some degree. It's a national debate. But there are a lot of people who say now, and I'm sure watched the last week's show, and said, yeah, but what about pensions? That's the smoking gun. If you're going to talk about the financial problem in Memphis, it begins and ends with pensions. You were finance director. Do you see that? And you've consulted with the city and with other administrations. Do you see that pensions somehow is the smoking gun of all our trouble?
No, not. I mean, it's much broader than that, and I think it's more fundamental in the way our revenue base is right. built. But it is the point that when they stop funding it at the level that they needed to fund it at, it is the hole that they dug themselves into.
Yeah.
And that is very difficult now to get out of.
Yeah, and we got a chart again from the series that shows over the 40-year period here the number of people on the pension program. So we'll put that up. Rick, you were faced with tough choices as the CAO. I mean, you all had a whole lot of land had been annexed. As you said, that you guys really weren't part of that, but you received it. The city was massive. I mean, as we said in the last show, bigger than the whole of New York City, at least physically. So there were a lot of service and a lot of people had to be hired, I suppose, from your point of view. But did you all look and say, well, you know, we're creating a potential pension liability that is going to get out of hand here? Or what sort of thinking went into that?
Well, first, sort of following up on what Bill said, to put this in context over this time frame. Originally, public employees received higher pension or benefits, if you will, primarily because they were under the market in their salaries. That was kind of an understanding. In order to recruit and retain, not with some charity, but it was called to recruit and retain employees, for whatever reason, the salaries were lower and pensions and benefits were higher. That probably began to shift with the coming of the public unions, and as that occurred, we faced pension issues. But I mean, in our situation, we fully funded the pension that was required, that the actuary said we should fund, and we funded that as it relates to in fact. Several years there, even after all these changes in the pension plan, several years we overfunded. As was pointed out in the article, we overfunded the pension plan in order to protect it against future downturns in the economy. No one could have ever anticipated, I don't think, or actuaries did not, that the economy would have such a tremendous downturn. Right. But we were fully putting additional funds into the plan to get it ready for eventual downturn in the economy.
And Tom, I mean, your take is pension the smoking gun that some people want to say it is?
I agree with Marlon. I think it's a problem. I don't think it's the smoking gun. I think there's always a political benefit in beating up public employees, so let's just do it with the pensions.
Some of it is, you talk about, Rick talked a little bit about the public employee unions getting involved. There got to be what I think a lot of people would be some excesses in some of the benefits, the 12-year program. When I get you to describe the 12 and out. Yeah.
It was a brief program that they had. It lasted, I think, 3 years. It was done for it had been 15 and out before that, and the council approved it in 2001 for elected and appointed officials, and basically you could retire after 12 years of service. It was very unpopular.
Except for those people who got it.
Yeah, right. Well, in the big picture, I mean, it really is a small, I mean, you're not talking huge amounts of money. I think there were about 300 people or so over the years that qualified for it. But I mean, it was very unpopular, and it was kind of
right? I mean,
emblematic of the large, the overspending that people thought was going on in the city.
Is it also emblematic? I mean, you start, I think, that story with, or it's in the story certainly. There's a 40-something-year-old former police officer who retired after 25 years, not 12 years. After 25 years, he gets a pension for the rest of his life in the $40,000 range, and he works in Florida as I think in banking.
In banking, yeah. You can't fault him for that. He took advantage of what the system allows. I think one of the interesting things that we found in that was, when we got a spreadsheet of all the retirees, a third of them retired in their 40s, which I thought was eye-opening. Because who you think about in the general public, and you got to try to be fair about this too, like Rick is saying. I mean, they don't get Social Security, although a lot of them have access to Social Security through second jobs or spouses. But I mean, the typical person is not going to retire in their 40s, with a full
Right.
pension payable immediately for the rest of their life. They're going to be working now until their 60s
Right.
and 70s, and so that was a very eye-opening, and it creates quite a drain on the pension system.
But that's been moved. That retirement age has been moved. Is that right? Is it
for new hires.
for new hires? It's at
Yeah.
52 now. Okay. So politically, I'm going to pick on Rick here. I mean, politically, you're in the administration. It's things like that are going on. You guys didn't put forward. I think. I mean, it's quoted. Harrington's quoted as saying we didn't put forward that 12 and out thing. And but you must, from a political point of view, you must sort of see that there's this growing kind of hot button back in the 90s, or was it not at that time, not into the 2000s? Was it? Were you aware of it?
It wasn't a hot
Yeah.
button. I mean, there had been a 15 and out for 20 years before that, and
Yeah.
I mean, it was 3 years difference. So for 20 years prior to the 12 and out, there was a 15 and out, and Mark had seen some employees that had retired as early as 40 under that plan. So, but it was a council. I'm not going to defend it. It was something that the council wanted to do. We were certainly content with keeping it at the 15 and out that had been in place for 20 plus years.
Yeah. Do you remember, Bill? I mean, we've done a lot of shows on, and you've obviously written a lot about all this debate in the last few years of trying to rein in the pension program, cut benefits, as the unions have been at the table saying, unfairly cutting the benefits, trying to fix the budget on their backs and so on. But do you remember when these plans, any other time that you've been following City Hall, that the debate about pensions was this lively?
No.
Yeah.
No,
It just wasn't an issue.
It's not been considered a quote unquote sexy issue to get into, but at some point I think someone was going to drill down to the essence of it. I mean, school funding wasn't necessarily a sexy issue either until the city council decided to make a point about it, and it's figured prominently into this.
Yeah.
And the game changer was when they changed the law that you've got to fund it at the full amount.
Right.
That's what changed it all. They had to deal with it.
Yeah. Tom, other cities? I mean, you work with other cities. This is by no means a Memphis problem. I mean, the state of Illinois, for instance, has just horrendous problems. Other cities.
Yeah, some cities going bankrupt over this issue.
Right.
I did some work on this in the beginning, not for the city of Memphis, but for someone else. And, it looked like Memphis sort of fell in the middle. It wasn't quite a crisis, but it was headed that way if nothing was done to deal with it.
Yeah, yeah. And everyone's take on what the changes that have been made so far. I mean, again, they haven't all stuck. I mean, some were passed last year, but the city council is kind of debating now. I mean, are they going in the right direction, a necessary direction, in terms of how they're trying to rein in some of the not just pensions, but the health insurance spending and so on and so forth?
I think they're going in the direction they have to go in.
Yeah.
Is it the right one? I don't know the answer to that. If you're talking about employees and what's right for employees, that's clearly they appear to be coming out on the short end of this. If you're looking at it from a budgeting standpoint, a finance standpoint, how do you balance a budget? They've got to do it.
But in part, and we'll get to more specifically about police spending later and the rise in police spending, but what is it now? 38%, give or take, of spending within the city budget is police. Fire, EMS takes up a whole other section of that. Again, Rick, you've been there. Do people want quick response from the fire department? They want the crime problem addressed. All that costs money. How, when you're weighing those kinds of issues in an administration that, it's, you got somebody who's putting their life on the line every day, do they not deserve a lifetime, a pension, a pretty generous pension? I mean, it's not like somebody who's just a clerk at typing somewhere in a company. It's a different type of job. And that certainly is the point that the unions are screaming about right now, that these are not typical jobs, so you can't look at this spending and these pensions through a typical lens.
Yeah, and traditionally that's the way it's been approached. I mean, Memphis is not unusual in that they have a 25 and out for police and fire. I mean, that's standard across. I would venture to say there are very few cities that have that vary significantly from that. When I was a CAO, we received calls continuously from the business community, the crime commission, and so forth. We need more policemen. We need more policemen. I think they did a study that showed we needed like I want to say, you probably remember,
There
it was
were
like
several
2,000 or something, outrageous number, or no, 800, I'm sorry, 800 new police officers. And so there is a clamoring for new police officers, and that's what drove that. And yes, I mean, when you hire a police officer, not only do you pay them, but you also accept this liability of a pension for their life.
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
I was just going to say, Rick mentioned something about how the pensions were historically used to counteract low salaries.
Right.
And the 5-year plan that the city conducted with PFM showed that some of the jobs are paid more than the private sector. Many are still lower. And it seems like somehow in the midst of all of this, someone would look at how do you stabilize or balance those jobs if you're going to cut pension benefits. Right. What salaries do we need to become more competitive in?
Well, and the other one, and it's in the story, and it's in headlines, and it gets reported. Some, I'm sure, would say overreported, but the rise in the number of six-figure jobs, the people who make 100,000 above, and then the DROP program, which was viewed as this really lucrative, huge payouts to former police director Larry Godwin, former head of the airport Larry Cox. Talk about those and the perspective on those.
Well, I think the interest in the DROP program, it's the Deferred Retirement Option Plan, and what it is a lot of people view it as a golden parachute. I mean, but as someone who has 25 years of service can enter into it, and they're essentially collecting a salary and a pension at the same time. They're paying a pension into an account that when the employee leaves, they take with them. But the city stops. This is kind of the interesting rub of it, is that the city stops making pension contributions to it. And so arguably, I don't know if anyone's taken a fine pen to it, that it's cost neutral. I mean, it doesn't really cost the city more, but I think the big question in there is whether it meets its purpose, which is succession planning, being able to anticipate when somebody's going to leave and then replace them. And what's happened in a lot of these cases is, like Alvin Benson, the fire director, I mean, he signed up for 3 years and then left like halfway through to a nice paying job with the county and took his pension and his drop payment. There's no penalty for leaving early. And so it really doesn't meet its mandate.
But your quote in the article is saying people don't understand it does save the city money. It looks, I think you were aware the political perception of it is terrible, but
horrendous, yeah.
But it saves the city money.
Yeah, because you don't have to contribute. You provide the same job. It's essentially hiring that employee back to do the job, and you do not have to pay them any benefits. In parts that were implemented incorrectly, these employees should be treated like new employees, like if they were employees that were just brought in to finish out this job for 3 years. And I think in terms of succession planning, I think it's good in fire and police. The trouble is, you're going to lose X number of police officers or firefighters, and you really do need the lead time to do that. What happens is budgetary considerations get in the way. Yeah. So you have this information, we're going to lose X number of police officers, X number of firefighters. We have to have a training class because there's a lot of lead time in hiring these folks, but you can't do it because the budget won't let you.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mark.
Other thing that happened is we confuse health benefits for retirees with pensions. Those are not the same thing. And the law changed between 2008 and today on health benefits. Health benefits were always treated as if they were paid out of current budget money, and it was not considered that you needed to budget for future health benefits. And that changed. I mean, it changed nationally, and now part of that liability is that they have to fund that future liability, where before they were just simply funding the current amount each year. And the rules changed, the accounting rules changed.
And just to piggyback, there was an OPEB amount in 1980.
Yeah.
Okay? It was there. It just wasn't recognized. But there was a liability that was existing for the city of Memphis, and it probably was a pretty big number, 1980. And here we are, 2015, the city hasn't gone bankrupt. But that was a large OPEB number that existed in 1980. And you know, that's something. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But to me, it raises a question about the accounting for both of these. I mean, currently the city's not under any state requirement on OPEB. It likely will be at some point, but you have to show this on the financials. And the argument that the unions have made is there's no way that all those employees are going to, in the case of the pension, retire all at one time. Is it legitimate that local governments have to show this and have to pay for it now?
I mean, I think the way I thought it should have been implemented was whatever was on the books at that point in time should have been somewhat grandfathered in some fashion. And then any additional benefit packages that were added to the retirees that council, that administration was responsible for, they should have to fund that. But to just sort of have this catch up over 20-something, 30-something years that had been building up and started way back. I mean, this is something that started in... The council, at one point, I think in the 80s, was talking about free insurance for retirees. You remember, they passed a resolution to have free insurance for retirees in 1980s. Yeah. Right. So can you imagine what the OPEB would have been for that? So, I mean, I think there should have been some sort of grace period or some sort of recognition of this or grandfathering in this amount, and then going forward to cause cities to make sure that when they approved a benefit, the long-term benefit, that they actually had to come up with some way to fund it.
Well, and so, you know, we've had a lot on the show about people, and we're going to have to switch to police department, but people on the show saying, look, I mean, the health benefits now that the city employees have is so much better than the private sector. I mean, so that argument we talked about before with the pensions and that it was a retention thing because the pay was lower, well, now it's really kind of shifted. I think most of us, I mean, certainly those of us in the newspaper industry have seen our deductibles, go sky high, and that's the general trend. And so I think it's interesting to see the frustration people have with that. But let's switch to one of the big drivers. We mentioned this before, and I think they put the chart up, which was police department spending, going from, and these are inflation-adjusted dollars, from about $100 million in 1970 to 230, 240 million now. And a lot of that took place in at least as the story goes, and it's on the chart, during the Harrington administration, because there was this huge rise in violent crime. I mean, there was a sense that was driving people out of the city. We get back to the population loss and so on. Your all sort of considerations at that time, I mean, they're really painful anecdotes in the story about the shootings and the killings and so on, and that the way to address that was to double the size of the essentially police department.
I mean, we talk about responsive government. We were trying to be responsive. As I said earlier, I received a number of calls, and the mayor received a number of calls from business leaders across the community, expecting us to hire more police officers to address the rising crime issue, and it declined there for some period of time. You know, I think it somewhat paid dividends, because in the mid-2000s, after all these police officers were on board and actually out there working, it did decline. I think there is something to say about the crime prevention as initiatives that should be implemented along with that. We tried some of those things, community policing and so forth, and I think trying to address crime in any major city across this country has always been and will always continue to be a challenge, as we saw in the headlines today. So it's something that we need to continue to fight. We felt like we needed to address it by hiring new police officers. I think it helped, but at the end of the day, I think we also have to have some preventive measures.
Again, cities, some perspective around the country. I mean, the perception of crime and reality of crime sometimes are different, but it's a huge issue in Memphis, but it's an issue in any kind of urban city. I mean, it nearly killed New York in the 70s.
Yeah, Memphis' violent crime rate and high violent crime rate goes back 100 years almost. Memphis has just always had that. It's just part of the culture for some reason. But the city's own 5-year financial plan said that compared to cities its size, Memphis is an outlier in the size of its police force compared to other cities. And so even after the Harrington administration increased the police personnel and budget, it seemed like the arms race continued. And so Memphis today, the city of Memphis is essentially public safety poor. If you take all the sales taxes that the city of Memphis collects, all the property taxes the city of Memphis collects, you're still $70 million short in funding police and fire. So
It's pretty interesting too, because Rick brings up the buildup that we went through. In the 1980s, during the Hackett administration, there were also calls from the business community, including a study that was funded by Ira Lippman from Guardsmark, that basically made the case that the city needed more police officers then in the 1980s. And the Hackett administration, Mayor Dick Hackett, was pretty vocal in saying that he didn't think that was the right strategy, that he didn't agree with that at all.
Yeah. Mark, I don't know, maybe the last word. Where are we now? They're trying to grow. I mean, all financial problems aside, they're trying to get back to a complement of around 2,600. Correct.
Yeah, and they're having problems retaining people. We keep hearing that, you know, because of the reduced health care benefits, officers are leaving. They're being recruited by other cities, and so it's a constant struggle. But I mean, this is one of these things, you know, is the glass half full or half empty? I mean, you have these budgetary constraints, but, you know, public safety is priority number one, and if you don't have that, you don't have anything. So, you know.
And the current budget increases the police budget, $16 million.
Right. All right, we will leave it there. Tom Jones, Mark Pereskia, it's a great series of stories. Thank you, and to everyone else at the CA. Marlon Mosby, Chris Hahn, Bill Dries, thank you all. Thank you for joining us. Join us again next week. Good night.
DHG is a full-service accounting firm serving Memphis and the Mid-South region for more than 60 years, combining community involvement with the technical resources of a national firm. For more information, visit dhgllp.com.